Brazil, in spirit, in Zoom. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. And I just want to start off with a big thank you to Rosanna Chermisky for bringing this journey to us from her home country. Tonight, the presentation is brought through the generosity of Bianco Travel Experience, one of the top companies that serves Brazil and throughout South America. And it was founded 20 years ago in Rio de Janeiro by Claudio Del Bianco and Denise Weisberg Del Bianco. So tonight we have two speakers, Sydney Linares, who is one of our presenters and a director at Del Bianco, who joined the group soon after it was formed. He will be covering a review of Brazil, and then we will hear from Connor O'Sullivan, the Del Bianco representative in Salvador. So I just want to bring up, you may be wondering, you hear Connor O'Sullivan, who's actually originally from Cork, Ireland. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Yes, I actually found this article of you online. So he actually ended up in Salvador after a 10-month backpacking trip throughout South America and found himself on a beach in Bahia, and that was it. So yes, the first part will be a review of Brazil, and then next we will be going to Capital da Alegria, or the capital of happiness, Salvador. So tonight's presentation is going to focus on African heritage. And then our next presentation, we're going to be going to Recife in Brazil, which is where the very first synagogue was formed in Brazil. And that one will also be focusing on the Converso community. So with that said, why don't I go ahead and turn it over to Sydney? And if you would like, so you can better see the presentation, well, actually, you'll fully see it as he shares his screen. Yes, Sydney, welcome. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Leah. And first of anything, I want to thank you, everyone. You, of course, and Rosanna for the opportunity. And I want to thank you, everyone from the Beth Temple community for joining us tonight. And allow me and my colleagues, Denise and Rosani, who are also joining us as viewers of this presentation, to talk a little bit about Brazil, about this exciting, amazing destination. And I'm saying this not because I live here, I was born here, I was raised here, and I live here in Brazil, but because it is indeed an amazing and exciting destination by many ways that you can think of. So, Leah, will you present that short video before I start, or?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Wonderful, wonderful. This is just a very quick view on what Brazil is all about. Okay, just 30 seconds. Okay. Okay, thank you so much, Leah. So I will start presenting a little bit of Brazil. Let me please share the screen with you so we can start our travel through Brazil and its culture. Well, actually, Brazil is the largest country in South America. We are bathed by the Atlantic Ocean and border most of the other South American countries. We have very good air links with the United States, with flights from Miami, Dallas, Houston with American Airlines. So New York, Miami, Atlanta, and Houston. So we have very good air connections. And also, should anyone else also prefer, there are Copa Airlines with connecting flights via Panama City. So it's pretty easy to fly to Brazil. And we are a tropical country, the fifth largest country in the world. The whole country speaks only one language, Portuguese. This is rather different from the rest of South American countries, which are predominantly Spanish-speaking. Then you would be wondering, why visiting Brazil? Well, we have some very important reasons, but I would like to highlight three of them. And the first one is its people. Brazilian people is renowned worldwide for its happiness, for its hospitality, for its sense of humor, for living at a very easy pace everywhere around the country. And what makes us be like this? I would like to say that it's because Brazil is a melting pot. We are crossroads, in one sense, of many different cultures, of many different people that forged the nation throughout this 400, 500 years of history since we started being colonized by the Portuguese. And we received influences from the African slaves who were brought here by the Portuguese, unwilling, but anyway, they left a very important mark in our culture. Then we have the indigenous people that you can see here. These are the native inhabitants of the country, and their mark in our culture is extremely important, extremely strong. And we had also immigrants from all over the world, mainly from Europe, especially East Europe, Italy, Germany. We also had lots of Jewish people arriving here. So that's why Brazil has a very strong Jewish community, especially in São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, but also in other cities. We also have a very strong Palestine community, a very strong Libyan and Syrian community. All these together helped to forge Brazil as we are today. A very melting pot of culture, of races, of religions, of culture. This is something very important and very dear to us. One of the other reasons is, of course, the culture, which is a product of this mixing of cultures and people. We have a wonderful mix of races here, of different religions, of colors, of course, and flavors. The Brazilian cuisine is influenced by all these different sources. So visiting Brazil is an adventure, not only because of its culture, but also it's a culinary adventure. It's really something that everyone should try once in a while. And of course, we have nature. Brazil is a wonder in terms of ecosystems, in terms of adventure programs, in terms of opportunities to be in touch with nature, to have some very relaxing vacations in a jungle, in the forests around the coast, in the Pantanal area, which is the biggest lowland flooded area in the world, a fantastic paradise for birds. So Brazil is really something rather unique. Again, still in this nature side, we have 44 national parks, plus dozens of state parks and municipal parks all over the country. So it's something really ready to be explored. Our coastline is more than 7,000 kilometers long, and we have wonderful beaches all along the coast. So one for every choice. And of course, we have the celebrations. Brazilians are known for their celebrations, especially Carnival and New Year's. Of course, because of what we are facing today, things have changed a little bit. Plans are being moved on in terms of how to proceed in this pandemic time, but be sure about one thing. Even with this, Brazilians have not lost their taste for celebrations, for parties. We are trying our best to keep everything alive, although of course in a different scenario with different ways of doing things, but still keeping the traditions. And then we come to what Brazil really is. This is an immense country, just like the US, of course, with different regions, with different attractions. From the north, mainly known for the Amazon forest, to the northeast, which is rich in terms of culture, the ocean beaches, the culture, the music, the central western part of the country, where Brasilia is located, our capital, which is at this area exactly, plus the wetlands, which is called Pantanal. The one I told you is a very wonderful paradise for birds. Then the southeast region of Brazil, that's where most of our population is located. That's where we have the biggest cities in the country. That's our industrial powerhouse. And the southern region, where we find Iguaçu Falls, right at the border between Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay. And this is the area where most of our European immigrants settled in the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. So this is a very fantastic place as well, with a very European flavor. So to start with, we have the Amazon forest, which is the largest rainforest in the world. It's by the equatorial line, so this is a very unique habitat. Very humid, very hot throughout the year. It's a land of waters and jungle. It's an amazing experience to visit the place and spend some time in one of the jungle lodges right in the middle of the forest. As you can see here, it's an amazing place. Or we can also have cruises along the different rivers of the region. This is a very rich place in terms of fauna and flora, although being a fantastic and this big, thick forest, we really do not see much the animals, but it really adds to the attraction, because you feel the mysterious thing that is the forest, because you can hear the animals, you can sense the animals, but you hardly see them freely. So you are walking in the jungle trail, or you are navigating the small streams and rivulets, and you sense eyes following you throughout the place you go. It's really amazing, because you know the animals are there, and this adds to the mysterious, to the exotic thing that you have around you. So this is a must-go place for anyone who wants to visit Brazil. The animals are extremely unique to the region, and among the different activities we can do, either stay in the jungle lodge or in a cruise ship, we have walkings in the jungle, especially during the dry season. We have canoe rides. We wake up early for the sunrise, which is an amazing thing to see, especially because of the birds leaving their nests and start flying all over in search for food. We have fishing. We have night tours to see how is the life in the jungle during the night. So it's something really amazing and extremely exciting. Then, leaving the northern part of the country, we come to the northeast. This is the land of history. This is the land of a very rich culture, especially the Afro-heritage culture, because Salvador used to be the capital of Brazil from the 16th to the 18th century, approximately. And it was a very important town in the colonial times. And most of the African slaves started arriving to Brazil in this part of the country. And from here, they were spread throughout. And nowadays, Salvador has a unique historical heritage. You can see here a small view of Pelourinho, which is the historical quarter nominated by UNESCO as a Mankind Heritage Site. It's an amazing place to visit. And of course, Connor will talk more about it. So I will not engage myself in talking much about Salvador. But then these are some views of what you can see in Salvador, the richness of its culture, of its landscape. An amazing thing to do is to explore the city, especially the historical streets, finding restaurants, bars, unique shops, and handcrafted artisans, everything. This is a very rich, beautiful city. From Salvador, and still staying in this area, the Northeast is very famous also for its beaches. As you can see here, some very natural pools because of some coral reefs along the coast. You can explore a myriad of different landscapes and do a lot of different sports, or at least just observing and really having the atmosphere sinking into you, so you'll be completely taken by this beautiful landscape. As I mentioned before, we have also the central western part of the country. That's where Brasilia, our capital, is located. It was planned and designed by two famous architects and paysagists in Brazil, Oscar Niemeyer, world known, and Lucio Costa. So this is an amazing place to visit, completely different from the rest of the country, because Brasilia is the epitome of modern architecture. So it's really interesting when you visit Salvador, Rio, and Recife, for instance, and you arrive at Brasilia and see all these modern structures, this amazing architecture. And Brasilia is right at the center of the country, and it makes a very good place to start exploring all the nature wonders around this area in the central plateau of the country. So these are just some views of Brasilia and its amazing architecture. And not far, but also in the central western part, we have the Pantanal. This is one of the richest places in the world for wildlife and plant life. The biodiversity here is truly extraordinary. And when we have the opportunity to stay in the Pantanal, it's really a magical moment, because you can see hundreds of birds, of mammals, of different species. This is an immense plateau area. It's a wetland, actually, very much like the savanna in the Africa, but only it's flooded throughout the year. So you have immense rivers and lakes and bays where animals gather for food or for nesting. It's really interesting to visit this place any time of the year. And Pantanal is quite easy combined with Rio and Salvador, Brasilia and São Paulo, for instance. So that in 10, 15 days or even 12 days, you can combine different areas of Brazil and make a real fantastic trip in the country. These are just some views of what you can have in the Pantanal area. Just like as in the Amazon, where you stay in jungle lodges, here in the Pantanal, you also stay, let's say, in jungle lodges, although this is not really a jungle, but we call here in Brazil as pousadas. And you are in the middle of the Pantanal with access to all this richness. The activities are very much like the ones you do also in the Amazon, which is boat rides, walking in the forest. You can leave in the morning or in the evening for photo safaris, for sunrise and sunset. The major thing here is to observe the immensity of the plains, the wildlife, and the plant life. The life in this area is dictated by the waters. So rivers all around. And when we are in the rainy season, the rivers go up and flood the whole area, making it a fantastic place, as you can see over here. It's really a dynamic habitat, so possible to visit any time of the year. And then we have the Southeast, which is the area in Brazil where you find our largest cities, where you find the center of our industry and economy and finance. This is also where you have most of our population living. It's almost 50% of the Brazilian population living in this area alone, which comprises 4 different states. And Rio de Janeiro is its main city in terms of culture, in terms of attractions, as a focal point for tourism in the country. Brazil had 2 major capitals during the colonial times, Salvador being the first, and Rio de Janeiro was the second capital from the 17th century down to the 20th century, 1960, when the capital was moved to Brasilia. So you can imagine the richness the city had during this period of time, and the monuments that still stand in the city. So the city is really rich in terms of culture, in terms of activities, nightlife, restaurants, sports, everything that you can think in terms of combining a whole country in one single place. And of course, one of the most beautiful landscapes in the world. Not surprising, the city was one of the first in the world to have the title of landscape, UNESCO landscape or something like that, because of its beautiful landscape and the mixing of what nature did with what we, mankind, did. So the blend between the city and the nature is really unique and exclusive. And it's a wonder, especially when you take a boat and see the city from the sea. It's truly amazing. And not only Rio, of course, because the Southeast is really rich in terms of culture and attractions. And very close to Rio, we have 2 beautiful places that shouldn't be forgotten in terms of visiting. One is Búzios, a little bit to the north of the city, about 2 hours drive from Rio de Janeiro. It's a small seaside resort, a small peninsula with about 15 different beaches, each one more beautiful than the other, and a small village where you find different restaurants, cafes, bars, a wonderful place to rest after a tour in Brazil, for instance. The other place, which is one of my favorites in the country, is Paraty. It's really a very small, beautiful town. It's a colonial town that was stopped in time. It used to be the main port in the country to deliver gold from up the mountains that you see behind the city to Portugal, which was the metropolis. And everything was taken from here. So when this stopped in the middle of the 18th century, the city also stopped. And thanks to this, the city is a real living museum because it is one of the most well-preserved historical towns in Brazil. Being by the sea, pictured by these immense mountains behind in the forest, this is a very unique place in Rio de Janeiro, very romantic, beautiful to stay and to explore the surroundings, because you can make lots of different tours in the forest behind, in the mountains behind, in the beaches that dot the coastline around Paraty. So this is one place that one should never forget to include in their trip to Brazil. Still in the southeast region, we have Minas Gerais state, Remember that I told you about the gold that was delivered through Paraty port? Well, the gold came from this area. And the name Minas Gerais in Portuguese means general mines, exactly for the gold and the precious stones that were explored in this area. And thanks to this richness, we have a string of historical towns that are recognized by UNESCO as a humankind monument, especially Ouro Preto. So this is a general view of Ouro Preto and its Baroque architecture. It's quite unique, a Portuguese style architecture that you find in Brazil only. You have some hints of it in Goa, in India, which is one of the very few places in the world with such architecture. And also a small sample of this type of architecture very close to Brazil as well, in Uruguay, in a small town called Colônia del Sacramento. So you see that everything is linked somehow, because this is one of the most beautiful places in Brazil. And when you come to Brazil, we can also extend the trip to other South American countries, for instance, and you'll be surprised to see something like this in Uruguay, for instance, which is completely different from the rest of the country. So Ouro Preto is the richest colonial town in Brazil, together with Salvador, with Pelourinho Historical Quarter. It is the most richest colonial historical area in Brazil. This is something not to be missed. And making a tour here is rather interesting because you can put together all these small towns and make a very complete circuit of the historical area in this part of the country. And of course, we cannot forget São Paulo, which is the largest city in Brazil, the powerhouse of the country in terms of industry and finance. It's a very modern city, although it was founded back in the 16th century, very few of the colonial buildings remain. So São Paulo is indeed one of the focal points in terms of nightlife in Brazil, in terms of culture as well. It is a very rich city in terms of cuisine. You have wonderful international restaurants from all around the world. So you can make in São Paulo a real gastronomy tour from the different parts of the world and different parts of the country. So for instance, if you do not have time to visit the whole of Brazil, in São Paulo, and in a way in Rio de Janeiro, of course, you can have a Brazilian gastronomy tour because you'll be able to sample a little bit of the Brazilian cuisine from all different regions in these two cities. These are some views of São Paulo. It's the largest city in Brazil, as I said. It has about 50 million people in the city alone and about 20 million in the metropolitan area. It is the second largest city in Latin America after Mexico City, but it's the largest city in South America. And coming to the south of the country, we have one of the most beautiful attractions Brazil has to offer, Iguaçu Falls, right at the border between Brazil and Argentina, and very close to Paraguay as well, although Paraguay does not share the falls, but the river that makes up our borders. Iguaçu Falls is a wonderful place to visit any time of the year. This is what you see from the Brazilian side. It's very interesting because in Iguaçu, you can visit both sides, the Brazilian side and the Argentinian side. And both sides offer different views and different experiences. From the Brazilian side, you have the best view because as you can see here in this walk bridge, you have this panoramic view of the whole of the falls. Actually, this view is from the Brazilian side towards the Argentinian area. So in the other side, you see the Argentinian part of the falls. This is a complete view of what you have from the waterfalls, and it's absolutely amazing. In the Argentinian side, in the other hand, you explore the little waterfalls that dot the area, and you can also see one of the most amazing attractions in the area, which is the Devil's Throat. It's an immense gorge where you come right next to the tip of the gorge, and you can not only see but feel the power of nature with the waterfalls coming down. You get really wet with all the rain that comes from the waterfalls itself. Actually, you can follow the arrow, and it is over here that you have this gorge, the Devil's Throat Gorge, that you can see from this vantage point of view. But visiting the Argentinian side, you come right to the tip of it. So it's exciting, it's unique, it's unmissable, actually. So this is what you see in Iguazu Falls. This is small boat near the falls. It's one of the most exciting tours that you can have in Iguazu. You take this small boat and explore the river, coming very close to the waterfalls. It's a fantastic, exciting experience. Of course, you get all wet, but it's worth doing it because the sheer sensation of the power of the water coming next to you is absolutely unique, and you should not miss it. Right above, you can see a general view of the waterfalls area with the Paraná River here, and down you have the falls, and the Brazilian side is exactly in this area. That's why you can see all of the falls from the Brazilian point of view. So in short, this is what you can have in Brazil. This is how you can explore the country. As I said, in between 10 to 15 days, you can make a fantastic trip in Brazil. Even more, and I encourage you to spend more time in Brazil in order to learn more, in order to see more, to experience the country and its culture and its people. So anytime, you are most welcome to visit Brazil to understand our nature, our country, and our culture. So explore Brazil with us. We'll be more than proud and happy to receive you all here. I'm sorry this was a little bit fast, but actually we have so much things to explore with Connor as well in Salvador alone because of the Afro Heritage Experience, that I just wanted to give you a glimpse of what Brazil is, to make you water mouth, let's say, and really think about Brazil for your next vacation, and hopefully soon, when all this will pass and we'll be free again to travel all around. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you for being so patient with me, and let me show you a little bit of Brazil. Leah, it's with you now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sydney. That was an amazing review on, oh my gosh, it is gorgeous there. So now we're going to transition to Salvador and learn more about the Afro-Brazilian culture. But before, I'm just going to share a minute video. It's a drone footage of Salvador. It's so beautiful there. So I just wanted to share it with you real quick. Okay. All right. Share. 1 second. Wrong video. Here we go. This is the right one. Boom. Share. right, that was just a taste of it. With that said, Connor, I turn it over to you.
Hi, good evening, everybody. And like Sydney, I thank you all for the opportunity to share a little bit of my love for the city of Salvador that, as Leah pointed out, I've been living there now since 1985. So 35 years there, and I've worked as a tour guide, and then I've worked in the travel industry pretty much since then. So to my mind, it's one of the great cities of Latin America. And hopefully you will enjoy some of what we're about to show to you. My focus tonight is on the African heritage of the city. So I'll give it just a brief overview of the city as it is, and then we'll go into talking a little bit more about the city itself. So I'll just share the screen now, if I may. And here we go. Right, Salvador, La Bahia. The word Bahia, of course, means a bay, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. Unique cultural destination, and a genuine deal. So, again, briefly, just to give you an idea of where it is, Salvador itself is 13 degrees south of the equator. And Sydney mentioned how Brazil's got 7,000 kilometers of beachfront. Bahia is home to 1,100 kilometers of that. So it's an amazing and enormous state. It's about the size of France. So when you're traveling in Brazil, I don't know how many miles Sydney has just flown across the country, but you know, it's an immense country landmass. Salvador is the third largest city in the northeast region. It's the third largest state, should I say, the state of Bahia. Coastline 1,100 kilometers. The population of Bahia is about 15 million, probably a wee bit more than about 16 million. And the state itself is a mix of, you know, ethnic mix of European, African, and indigenous. And we'll be concentrating on the African aspect of it here. Just give you a brief look at the map and see where Salvador is located, just at the entrance to the Old Saints Bay here. So I'll have so here we go. So Salvador, talking now a little bit about the city. And again, I just want to point out that where it's located, this peninsula is the area of the city itself. I'd like to draw attention to what is the largest bay in the Brazilian coast. It's the All Saints Bay, because the bay was, well, we don't like to use the word discovered, but Amerigo Vespucci landed right at this point here on the 1st of November, 1501. And so he was the first European to set foot there. And being All Saints Day in the Catholic calendar, he decided to call it All Saints Bay. So that's how we get the name from. 50 islands in the bay. Not all of them are made out on the map. But I would like to draw your attention to this little town that we'll visit later on in our presentation. And this over here was where all of the sugar was grown. And this town here formed a vital link to the distribution and the sale of the exportation of sugarcane or sugar to Europe. So this spot here is where the bold Amerigo Vespucci boldly went where no other European had gone on the 1st of November. And this is the entrance to the All Saints Bay. This area here, you can see it's a city, very modern city, very built up in this part of town. The third largest city in Brazil. Currently a population of 3 million people. It's the capital of the state of Bahia, again, as I mentioned, the size of France. It was the first capital in Brazil up until 1763. From 1549, when the Portuguese decided to build the first walled-in planned city in Brazil, Salvador was the capital of Brazil up until 1763 when it moved to Rio. It's a World Heritage UNESCO site, and deservedly so. It's a seat of economic, political, and administrative power from the foundation in 1549 to 1763. It's the original source of wealth from Brazil, and that would have been from the Brazil wood, which was a wood which was used for early textile printing in Europe, sugar, tobacco, and to a lesser extent, gold. There were also gold deposits in the state of Bahia. The city itself is in that wonderful location. The city is built on a fault line, a non-active fault line, which has created this cliff, and is on top of this cliff, which is on average 210 feet above sea level, that the Portuguese decided to build their first walled-in planned city. Birthplace of a nation, it's the most African city in the Western Hemisphere. We have a population of 3 million. 80% of the city would trace their bloodlines back to Africa. It's also, interestingly enough, just recently been designated a UNESCO City of Music, and it's amongst a number of very, other major cities around the world that are known for its music, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on as well. For many, and indeed for me, and I think everybody who knows and loves Brazil will say that it's the heart and soul of Brazil. And perhaps to give you a better idea of how we see it and how you might see it, we think it is to Brazil what New Orleans is to the United States, what Cartagena is to Colombia, and what Havana maybe is to Cuba. So it's a wonderful, wonderful city to be living in and to be a member of the community there. This is the oldest stone structure left in the city. This dates from 1580. This is a fort built right at the mouth of the bay. Is the first lighthouse. This is not the original, but it was the first lighthouse in Brazil. And then we just work our way from the mouth of the bay in towards the city, and you see it's got some great city beaches. The Guardian newspaper in London said that this beach here, which is called Porto de Bahia, was one of the 10 best city beaches in the world. It's like a big open swimming pool. It's where I go when my wife and I go to the beach. This is where we go to. And then you get into the city and you see how the city is built on top of a cliff overlooking the bay. The landmass that you see over here is not the other side of the bay. This is one of the 50 islands in the bay, which is 29 kilometers long and still within the confines of the bay. This faint line here, I don't know if you can see it, that is the other side of the bay. So this is one of the city's landmarks, which is the elevator, which connects the upper to the lower city. You can see it's a very modern city, but it's a fortified city. We have 15 forts straight along the eastern boundary border of the bay. And you can see how the city is built on a fault line and this cliff which dominates the area. And as we get in towards the city itself, that's another view of the elevator here. This is the old customs house, which now is a thriving fleet. This is the dock area down here, the new terminal for cruise ships. But the Pelourinho, which we're going to be talking about, is this area. I will be visiting that now as we move along. This is an aerial view of it. Again, give you the idea of the location of the city. This is bearing in mind that it was the first planned city in Latin America. And we refer to it as the Pelourinho, which is an English word, or borrowing from the English word pillory. And a pillory was a whipping post where the slaves would have been publicly punished in the Pelourinho Square. This is the largest complex of colonial, residential, and religious architecture in Latin America. There are over 4,000 homes in this particular part of town, or 4,000 buildings. Some of the most elaborate Baroque churches in Brazil, rivaled only by Ouro Preto that Sydney mentioned just a while ago, UNESCO World Site. And it just refers to its location there, which is so you got in Salvador, you got the upper city and the lower city, you got the new and the old, you got the European and the African. So, from the tourism business, we try to avoid cliches, but the term city of contrasts really is fitting for Salvador. And I think the drone shot Leah went through the spires of this church here. This is perhaps the most important church in Latin America. This is the Church of the Franciscans.
Connor, I'm sorry to interrupt. Is the dog barking behind you, or?
It's way over there. I don't know where it's across the road.
Okay.
I can't do anything about that. I've come to the quietest part of the house. But okay. But is that spoiling things? I mean, can people still hear me? It's not my dog. It's the neighbor's dog.
Well, I'm sure we all at one point have had to figure out how to block out noises and focus on the golden presentation in front of us. So
yeah, forgive me, I hadn't noticed it. I was so concentrated on what I'm doing here. But yeah, I'm actually 810 kilometers south of Salvador, where I'm in a very remote part of Bahia, and so one of the neighbor's dogs has gone wild. So San Francisco Church. And the interior of this church is spectacular. There are 900 kilograms of gold in the gilding of this church. And this is one of the must-sees to see in Salvador. And then Sydney mentioned about the Pelourinho, and I mentioned about the fact that there was a pillory where the slaves were publicly punished. This is actually the Pelourinho Square. And what I'd like to draw your attention to here is this church, which is the Church of Our Lady of the Rosary of the Blacks. It doesn't translate particularly well, but this was a church which was built by ex-slaves over a period of 100 years on very meager resources on land donated by the then king. So this is one of the most symbolic black churches in Salvador, and every Tuesday and every Sunday the mass at 6 o'clock on Tuesdays and 10 o'clock on Sunday has this choir in there, and it's like an African band playing. It's just like one of the major experiences in Salvador. And this is another little image of it as well. And these ribbons, I'll draw your attention to these ribbons later on. You see that each one of them is a different color. And these are ribbons which each one of these ribbons and the colors would represent one of the Candomblé gods and goddesses, of which we're going to speak about very shortly. So we'll leave the city behind now. I could go on talking about it. Maybe I would just like to finish up talking about Salvador from the tourism point of view, in saying that it's a city that's going through something of a renaissance. Over the last 7 years, the city has undergone a complete refurbishment.
It was fun. I had a lot of stuff in my teeth.
Sorry? Okay, which has undergone a complete renaissance with a major strategic plan to attract people to the city, to visit the city. For the first time that I've lived in and worked in travel, our outgoing mayor is at the end of his second term of office. The first day in office, he said that he wanted to transform Salvador into the premier cultural destination in Latin America, and he's gone about doing a number of projects, all of which he has completed. So now we have new cultural attractions. We have new, all of the beaches have been cleaned up. We have new promenades. We have re-urbanized parts of the city that were completely forgotten for many years. So let's go on to the African heritage in Bahia. Now, I'd like to talk to you about where the slaves originally came from. The first group of slaves that came into Salvador actually came from Angola. For some reason, it's not in there. But the main ones are Congo, Cameroon, Democratic Republic of Congo, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Mozambique, and South Africa, and of course Angola, which should be in there. They were the main ones to come in there. The second one would have been what was known as the Slave Coast: Nigeria, Benin, Togo, and Ivory Coast. And the ethnic origins there would be Yoruba or Nago, Jeje, Fongs, Iwe, and Fante Ashantis. These were the different nations that came to settle Salvador. This second group is particularly interested because that is the most profound influence currently in Salvador. And then there were others which came from the Sudanese region, but the interesting ones here would have been from Senegal and Mali. And these Malays were Islamic slaves that came to Salvador. And so there would be the three main ethnic groups. Now, the trafficking of slavery, the first slave ships came into Salvador in 1526. The dates are hard to find, but and the records are almost impossible to find. But they reckon 1526, some people say 1530. And most of them came, as I said, from either West Africa. One thing that people don't always understand, that Brazil, and these numbers vary, Brazil received 3.9 million to 4 million slaves, while the US received something like 500,000. So the majority of slaves that like Salvador got, or Brazil got, 8 times more than were shipped to the United States. But you can see from this map here now how the numbers, like 5.6 million just out of West Africa alone, 1.56 came to Bahia. Rio de Janeiro got even more. So it was a these dreadful crossings where it could take 3 or 4 weeks to make the crossing. An interesting thing, just as we go along, the currents in the southern Atlantic Ocean go in an anti-clockwise fashion, and that naturally assisted the going and the coming and the going from West Africa to Brazil. Whereas north of the equator, the currents and the winds go in an opposite direction. So that assisted the slaving, which was controlled by England, Holland, and France to a lesser extent. But all of the southern ocean was pretty much dominated by the Portuguese. They were very, I won't say ruthless, but they were very good at the slaving because they were the first ones into West Africa. So just give you an idea of numbers, and this is a preamble to get to where we're going to go to see how important the African heritage in Salvador. You see in the first century there was only 50,000. Then in the 17th century there were 560, and then there was a boom in the 18th century, of course, fired along by the sugar. And then we had it again. I'll explain this in a little while. We had it again from the 1830s on. If those of you remember that the British, the English Navy prohibited the trafficking of slaves south of the equator in 1831. So you see, in 1831 there was a big black market enslaving going on from Africa to Brazil, and then it all began to fizzle out thankfully in the 1850s. So the crossings were not for forever. There was a lot of men and women and children died along the way. A lot of them threw themselves over. A lot of them died of malnutrition. They say something like 2 million died in the crossing. So to say, this is what the conditions were like on the ships, and you have, this is the best photograph I could come up with, but you can see them like on the hull of the ship, just stacked. This is the bottom row of the ship, and then this is the top row. We 500 or 600 on some of the ships. Dreadful conditions to cross. So there was a triangular slave trade. Normally a triangular slave trade, where on the outward journey they would bring goods from Europe and trade them for slaves in Africa. Then these slaves were brought to the colonies, and then what the slaves were producing in the colonies were then brought back to Europe. But what happened in Salvador was a little bit different, especially in the middle of the 18th century. Sorry, I mean the 19th century. After the collapse of the Haitian government, there was a revolt in Haiti. There was a shortage of sugar. Bahia had already lost its importance within the sugar trade, but they got another stab at it. But in this case, it was a bilateral trading where we had between Salvador and the Gulf of Benin, where we had a very high value was placed on a third grade of tobacco, prohibited for sale in Europe, but much sought after by those dealing in slaves. And so you had slaves from West Africa traded for tobacco and this aguardente, this sugar cane rum. Any of you who've ever had a caipirinha will have had the aguardente. So there's a very high value placed on this. So we had traffic, a bilateral traffic, just straight across the South Atlantic. And also you had a lot of the first laundering of money, where the gold would be shipped out and would be shipped out illegally and brought in legally, because to avoid paying their 20% tax to the Portuguese crown. And it's mainly for this reason that we have such a strong Yoruba influence in Bahia. And this is what Salvador is most famous for. No other part of Brazil is this influence so strongly felt, or where African traditions are so well preserved. While other influences are found, Bantus from Angola, Jejes from Benin, and Malis from Sudan, the overriding influence is that of the Nagos from Nigeria. I remember many, many years ago working with some university professors from Lagos, and they were there to study the Yoruba as spoken in the Candomblé temples, and they said that it was Yoruba as if William Shakespeare would have spoken it. This is the vernacular for the Candomblé religious traditions, and they said that it was you don't hear that particular form of Yoruba spoken. It was very high Yoruba. Now we talk about the Candomblé. Candomblé is a trance religion where the spirits of what we know as orishas, who are deities who were deities who during their lifetime would have, human beings should I say, over their night, who would have gained domain over different aspects of natural forces. It could be the thunder, the wind and the seas, the forest, and so on. Deified ancestor who, when alive, established links which guaranteed him or her control over certain natural forces. And these deities would also have learned how to work with metals and power over the elements, understanding of the medicinal purposes, medicinal and spiritual properties of plants. Now, there's another aspect, but before we go on to that, if I could explain to you what happened. It's a trance religion where the spirits are invoked through a series of percussion, verbal calls, and dances, and they are then brought down. The spirits incorporate people who have been prepared to receive them when they come down, and this is the basics of the candomblé. So it's a trance religion, and in Salvador we have 1,400 places of worship for this too. There's one aspect that I wanted to briefly touch on, and which is something of a misnomer, this idea of syncretism, because it's said in Brazil that these are two religions forming into one. These are not two religions forming into one, but there was a reason why the slaves adopted different Catholic saints to and syncretize them with their deities. And we'll speak a little bit about that now. Slaves were not allowed to practice their religious traditions. The Portuguese were great lovers of religious processions, so they would bring their favored slaves to these traditional processions. And the slaves then in turn began to adopt different Catholic saints to represent their orishas, or their gods and goddesses. And it was basically a ruse used to disguise the worshipping of the orishas. This was prohibited up until the 1950s. You could not have a candomblé festival in the city or ceremony in the city up until the 1950s. It was prohibited. So everything went underground, and this was the ruse that they chose to disguise what they were actually doing. And if we were just go down very briefly through the different orishas, of these deities, and I don't expect you to remember all of this, but all of this has been recorded, and perhaps you have a chance to watch it later on. In the hierarchy, Oxalá, who would have been the god of creation, he would have been syncretized with Jesus Christ. His dominion was over birth and creativity. His main color is white, and his attributes be wise, moral, and flexible. We're going to talk about Iemanjá shortly. She was syncretized. She's the goddess of the sea. She was syncretized with the Madonna. Her colors are blue and white. She's calm, serious, dignified, very closely connected to the birth rituals as well. We're going to talk a little bit about Yansá, who was syncretized with Saint Barbara, who's got the dominion over winds and storms. Her colors are red. Do you remember those ribbons I showed you earlier on? This is where these colors come in, because each one of those ribbons represent one of these gods and goddesses. Barbara, Santa Barbara, you know, Yansá, you know, she's in the room. She's a very strong, forceful character. In the same way as we use astrological charts or signs to define somebody's character or somebody's attributes, people from Candomblé will do the same thing. So we won't. And that song, Leah, that you started was called Ejo Oshun. That was the first song. That the city is of Oshun. Oshun is the goddess of rivers and lakes. And that song is one of the hymns of the city by a wonderful singer-songwriter called Geronimo. And these are so when the adepts of the candomblé begin dancing to the drums, to the sound, to the songs, and once they're taken into a trance, they're then dressed into these sacred costumes, and they come back through the temple or the place of worship dressed in these costumes. We'll just point out a few now as we go along. This one here is Iemanjá, the goddess of the sea. This one here is Oshun. She's the goddess of rivers and lakes. That song that I just mentioned is about her. This is Oxalá, the god of creation, the wise elderly man. This man here is the god of illness. He's Omolu, and so on. And this is another version of Omolu down here. This is an interesting one. Ogun, the god of iron. He's very much a warrior figure. So if you were to go to a candomblé temple and go to a candomblé ceremony, you would see people in trance dancing in these costumes. And the oracle, which would decide which your god or goddess is, who protects you, is done through the what we call the Jogo de Búzios, which is the cowrie shell oracle. There are 16 shells, in the manner in which they throw the shells, they will be able to decide who it is that protects you and looks after you. And just leaving that aspect of the city now, this just how infused the candomblé is in the city. This is one of the city. This is the city's main lagoon, and these statues were erected maybe 15 years ago now. So that's how important the city is. And this area where they were built is where some of the oldest candomblé temples in the city are. The oldest one is actually from 1830, and it's called the White House of all things, Casa Branca. And so we spoke a little bit about how the Portuguese went to these, were big fans of these festivals, and just very briefly to show you how this idea of syncretism and how the Portuguese traditional processions were adopted by the enslaved. This is a festival for Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara, her color is red, but it was syncretized. Yansa, it would be her correlated candomblé deity. Remember that Yansa is the goddess of winds and storms and fire. Santa Barbara was the house of Saint Barbara on the Portuguese warships. It's where they kept the gunpowder. And any of you who have been in the military will probably know that Santa Barbara is the patron saint of ordnance. So there were always very tangible reasons why the slaves chose these different gods and goddesses. And that's a major festival that takes place every December 4. It was just on again last year. These are in the streets of Salvador, and you can see that they're coming up from where the main ceremony takes place in this church of the Our Lady of the Rosary of the Blacks. The other one, which is my favorite, and this is the part of town I live in, this is Iemanjá. She's the goddess of the sea. She's the most revered of all, and her date is always on February 2, where people will go down and offer gifts of flowers to the goddess of the sea, which will then be blessed by the gods and by the priests and priestesses, and then of the candomblé, and then put on boats and taken out to sea and dropped down on the ocean as a gift for the goddess of the sea. So maybe 500,000 people at this particular festival every February 2nd. It's as I say, it's my favorite day in the city. She's quite often depicted as a mermaid. Another interesting aspect, just in passing, that the candomblé is much more of a matriarchal than a patriarchal religion. Each temple is completely autonomous, and most of the religious leaders of the temples are actually women, which they call Mãe de Santo, Mother of the Saints, and then she would be the leader for her sons and daughters of the saints. These are these flowers coming down. It's a very touching ceremony. People come up at like 4 o'clock in the morning, stand patiently in line to have their flowers blessed, and then it all goes out to sea late afternoon. This is a woman who was dancing. When I came by, she was dancing for Yansa. As you can see, the red beads that she's just being put around her. And this would be a very normal activity for us from the West. It's probably a little bit, we're not accustomed to seeing people going to trance, but you see kids in the middle of these ceremonies. But people from all ages will come, give their gifts to the goddess of the sea, asking for graces to be granted, thanking for graces already granted, and it's just a wonderful day of peace. Everybody dresses in white. And then the last one we're going to look at in the second last one we look in the city is Bonfim Church, which was also portrayed in one of the videos that you've just seen recently. And this is where women from the candomblé with jars of lavendered water will dance 7.5 kilometers from one church down to another church to wash the steps of the Church of Bonfim. And the Church of Bonfim is the most famous church of pilgrimage in Brazil. And the African slaves chose Bonfim, or Lord of Bonfim, to represent Oxalá as Jesus Christ. So there they are off with their jars of lavender water, quite often on their heads, and they just dance down this 7.5 kilometers. You see people of all ages involved, and this is just a glimpse of this particular festival. Probably has 1 million people in it, and they say those who have faith will go there on foot. So it's usually it's right in the middle of January. It's the hottest time of year, but and it's not a city holiday, but this is what people get up to when it's not a city holiday. It's the wonderful, and then they hear, you see, but they come to wash the steps of this particular church here, which is correlated with Oshala, the god of creation. And then the last one was be August 16. This is for another one of the Candomblé deities. This time it's Omolu. And Omolu is the god of illness. He's got the power to cure diseases. And he does it in a very odd way. You can see here, the ground is covered in popcorn here. That's all this popcorn here. So popcorn is used to discharge bad energy. And they would give these people blessings with this popcorn. And then the popcorn is set on fire to get rid of all of those. So inside here, the priest is saying mass. Outside here, the people from the Candomblé are worshipping Omolu, the god of creation. And then Salvador is the largest street carnival in the world. There are 2 million people dancing on the streets of Salvador at any time during Carnival. Everywhere else in the country, it's 4 days. Salvador, it's now 7 days, and it's actually bordering 10 days. So it's a major festival in the city. But there's a very strong African influence in it as well. And most of these would be from African drumming. This particular group is the largest group in the city. They're called the Sons of, and they were a group of stevedores originally back in 1949 when the stevedores were on strike. And they decided that they would go out during Carnival, during a Carnival. So they adopted Mahatma Gandhi as their mentor and their inspiration and their mascot. And they called themselves the Sons of Gandhi. And there were 17 of them about the first time. They got these like white sheets and they painted them blue, and these blue and white beads. And this is what they look like when they go out during Carnival. They now normally dance with 7,500 men dance like this, and dancing pretty much to the rhythm of the song that Leah opened the presentation with, which is this Ijesha, which is this very like shuffling beat. So this is called the white carpet. This is one of the most spectacular things you see during Carnival. But they are all honoring Oshala, the god of creation, who's always dressed white, hence the white. So. They're inspired. Their costumes were inspired by Gunga Din, for those of you who remember Gunga Din. And another aspect would be these afro-Blocos, which is just these African powerhouse drum troops. The type of rhythm is known as samba reggae, and it's the most thunderous sound you can hear alive. The ground, the earth shakes as these people go by. And each one of these groups would be from different areas of the city. Each one of them be cultural groups that seek to raise a sense of self-esteem, Black empowerment. So they're not just out on the streets just playing music. There's a whole kind of philosophy and history and struggle that goes on behind it. Those of you might have heard the album by Paul Simon called The Rhythm of the Saints, where he played with a very famous Salvador band called The Obvious Child. If ever you want to have a listen to that, it's just a wonderful, and it's a great mix of Paul Simon and his band, then this powerhouse drumming group from Salvador. This particular group is called Ileaye, which is the most traditional, the oldest one in the city. And then we said earlier, and I think I might have shown you a clip of this particular map. We're going over here to Cachoeira, which is 120 kilometers due west of Salvador. And the road takes us through Santa Mara, which has got one of the most liveliest local markets. And then we get to this jewel of a town called Cachoeira, which, a bit like Ouro Preto, was stopped in its tracks, or a little bit like Paraty, stopped in its tracks when it was originally a fluvial port, and then it was a railway junction, and then it got bypassed by the main road. So it stopped in its tracks. But it was to here, at the time of the major suppression of Candomblé in Salvador, that the slaves, the people living, the freed slaves, decided to move to get as far away from the city as possible so that they practice their religious traditions. So it's a very important town. And going out there on the road, it's just a drive through some of the most beautiful countryside in the state here. This is an old sugar mill. The city itself is nestled in the heart of the Paraguaçu River. The word cachoeira actually means a waterfall, and was the furthest navigable point up this river that the boats could come. And this is just a little jewel of a town. It's also it's considered the cradle of African heritage in Bahia. The great local markets. These are photographs which were taken maybe 6 months ago, so it's still like this. Very few Caucasians out in this part of the world. It's also a very beautiful part of the city, of the countryside. This is a particularly stunning day. But what I really wanted to concentrate there is the Boa Morte celebrations in Cachoeira, and they take place in August 13 and August 15. And this would be the most important of these candomblé manifestations, religious manifestations throughout the African heritage calendar. And the sisterhood of the Boa Morte. The Boa Morte would mean a good death or dignified death. And this is one of the oldest sororities of women in the world. It's the organization itself is 220 years old. And they have this, their main events, as I say, from August 13 to 15. So just go and talk a little bit about them. Have you permitted? The Sisterhood of the Boa Morte is a sorority movement, had its beginnings in the senzalas, the slaves' quarters, where slaves would gather to discuss the news about abolition and pray for slaves killed in the liberation movement. Once freed, ex-slaves would often form religious associations, sisterhoods and brotherhoods, often using Catholic Church as a vehicle. But these associations were really cultural centers whose aims were to free other slaves from captivity and to preserve the traditions handed down verbally from generation to generation. These people are the guardians of the secrets, all women. Their aim also was to help newly freed slaves to survive in a world where they were no longer a master with his whips and chains. They started the first, we call them banks. The word escapes now. Credit unions. They started the first credit unions where these were women who were working. They would gather their resources together and offer low interest loans to newly freed slaves so that they could get going. It's also reminiscent of secret female societies in Africa. The Boa Morte worship the Iyas, which are the female spirits of the dead. A good death or Boa Morte was seen as being a proper passage from the material to the spiritual world. That's quite they became quite wealthy, I won't say, but they would woman passed away last year at the age of 106. My feeling, she was just such a one to sit around the table with, scenic aspects of it, and this is the statue of the Boa Morte, the Madonna that they're carrying behind it, because this is another one of those syncretized. They're apparently worshipping Our Lady of the Good Death, but they're actually worshipping the Iyas, which are the spirits of the dead. This is their gala. This is their gala procession on the 15th of August, which is the feast of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary. And when that day over, towards the end of the day, they change their clothes and they go and they have what we call a samba de roda. And samba de roda was like a samba circle, started out on the other side of the bay. The samba actually started in this part of Bahia and then was later taken to Rio by women from here, and I think it was, her name was Chia Siata. She brought the first samba to Rio. So samba started here in Bahia. So it's samba which is done like this is a painting by one of my favorite artists, a man called Caribe. They have a guitar, 2 tambourines, and a shaker, and this larger drum over here. And you dance, and you're called into the center of the circle. You dance, and then you can choose the person you want to dance with. Another aspect of African art heritage is capoeira. Capoeira means a clearing in the forest, and it was to these clearings in the forest that these African slaves would go to practice what has become known as capoeira. It's a martial art which is or the art of sleight of hand and foot, where you get your position into a position where he or she is off guard, but you don't put in the blow, but you show you could. It was once described to me, and I think it's a very poetic way of describing it, as the dance of gladiators and the fight of ballerinas. It's you know, it's a martial art which has its own philosophy that goes with it. And it's intrinsically linked with this African identity. You can even see here behind the orchestra which is playing, you have to have 8 people playing the sound live, and you can see these orishas again. This is one of the most famous capoeira schools in the city. They have nuclei spread around the world. Finland, Russia, South Africa, Israel, many throughout the United States, and they're playing this bowed instrument, which is the berimbau, which is the backbeat of the candomblé, of the capoeira. It's the same school. So we visit the school. We can have a short lesson on the basic moves of it, and then sit around and watch the work. So there are 2 forms of capoeira. The one that is considered the purest one is the capoeira from Angola, which is slower, more subtle of the martial art forms. It differs in many ways from the flashier derivative capoeira regional, more authentic, though less spectacular at first sight, but certainly more intricate. There are 2 forms. The other form this is an interesting one. Back in the 1930s, the then president of the country, Getulio Vargas, wanted to create an intrinsically national sport. So he contacted one of these capoeira masters, and they came up with this kind of more gung-ho, flashier capoeira regional, which is much more aggressive. And but from the African heritage point of view, the capoeira is considered more authentic. It's classified as a national heritage, a cultural heritage.
Connor,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to mention so people can ask some questions.
Yeah.
I know people have some things they have to head to, but we'd love to open it up just soon. I'm just
getting to the end now. Just that we're going to talk very briefly about the Bahian cuisine, which is again comes from Africa. Obviously, a lot of it comes from Africa, predominantly the palm oil. And then the Baiana giacarajé. For those of you who are familiar with falafel, this is our version of the giacarajé. These are black-eyed peas dumplings, deep fried in palm oil. And this is a food which was one of the sacred foods of the candomblé. This is the food of Yansa. I have a quite poetic little 2-minute video of this if you like to show me, or maybe skip it if time doesn't permit. I have another video that I'd like to show at the end just to close up. But this is the most important street food of the city. And these women come out onto the streets late afternoon selling their wares. And these were the first forms of means where women could actively sell their wares on the streets, and they would come out at say late afternoon, allowed by their slave master at the time, sell the acarajé, and then give the slave master or the owner, because these are residential or urban domestic slaves, and they would give her a part of their earnings, but they could also keep their money. And this was a way in which women managed to buy their way out of slavery, gain their freedom, and then continue as they were then freed slaves to maintain their household. So it's an intrinsic part of life. I would really love to show that video, Leah. You can tell me whether I can do that or not.
Yes, we have 2 more minutes.
It's a 2-minute video.
Then...
Yeah, okay. Well, okay, let's go. So I'll, you bear with me now, I'll find it. It's, maybe I won't. Let's continue. If I get it at the end, I show the other main dish.
If you could send me the videos, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's a great little video. And then this is the moqueca, which is again straight out of Africa. It's fresh coriander, red and green peppers, tomatoes, shrimp, fish, all cooked in these earthenware woks and filled with coconut milk and dende. And yeah, and that's the end of it. Another thing that I would just like to point out in passing that with group travel, this perhaps doesn't work as well with FIT travel, but with group travel, it is possible to put together demonstrations or presentations by local experts on African heritage. And this is one of the ones that we provided a few years back in the medical faculty in Salvador. So pretty much talking about what we've just been talking about now. And that's it. There is one other video that I would really like to show. And if you bear with me, I had it all lined up here, but for some reason it's gone. I might have to send that on to you too.
Is it a YouTube link or?
Both of them are YouTube links. Yeah, one of them is great. Well, both of them are great to my mind.
Well, if you want to send it to me in the chat real quick, I can share it on mine.
I'll just see if I can. Okay, see if I can do that. I think you might have it already. All right, here we go. Here we go. So I'll do the one the Baiana first, okay? Can you see this? Can you see this?
No, we can't. Yeah, we can't see your screen. We can't hear the audio for it.
Well, let's.
Yeah, we'll just watch it.
I'll send it to you. Yeah. So I think that's my contribution. Thank you all for, hopefully you found that I've been the opportunity to share a little bit about African heritage in the city of Salvador.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much, Connor.
We'd love to.
Really is. I can see why they call it the soul of Brazil. It's absolutely wonderful. I know when things calm down, it is now on my list as a go-to. So thank you so much for that informative presentation. And yes, please send me the videos. I will certainly send that out to everybody. So for those who can still stay on and are interested in asking some questions, let's open it up. Just real quick, I just want to mention next week, we'll be focusing on the Jewish community. And that is next on the 14th. So Monday the 14th. And then after that, we'll be meeting a month later on January 11th. We're going to be covering Israel, Haifa and the Golan Heights. And then on the 25th, or sorry, the 26th, we'll be going to Prague. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions for Sydney and for Connor. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing your screen so we can see all the faces. So if anyone wants to raise their hand or send me a message and let me know you have, okay, Roger has a question.
Yeah, first, thank you for these wonderful presentations. For many of us, though, there's an elephant in the room that isn't mentioned, and that's Bolsonaro and the burning of all this, the rainforest. How is that regarded, and how is it affecting, I guess COVID is affecting travel more than anything, but what are people like you thinking about, if you can talk about it, about Bolsonaro and what's going on and so on? It's very top of mind for so many of us when we think about Brazil these days, because more of that coverage is in the news about Brazil than any other kind of Brazilian news.
Okay, well, actually, yes, we can talk about it. There is no constraint about it. There is no restraint whatsoever. News and papers, writers, anyone can talk about anything here. So actually, this gentleman, if we can call him this, he is losing a little bit of his support in most of the politic ways. So much so that we had local elections throughout the country for mayor and city representatives. And let's say that 98% of candidates that had the support from Bolsonaro and Bolsonaro family, they failed to make to the polls. So actually there was overwhelming response from the people against his policies, both in regards to the environment and also to his handling of the pandemic situation, because he has been quite the denial guy against all proofs and against all scientific information. So people really thought about that, and the answer was in the elections. Most of his candidates lost. That being said, I would say that in terms of travel, the only real effect we have is what you just mentioned. People have the information, people want to know about it, but Brazil in general has not been directly affected by his policies in terms of avoiding people to come or avoiding ourselves to visit the places. Because although there is all these things going on in terms of the Amazon and even in the Pantanal, areas that are visited by most of travelers are not exactly in the same areas where all these, let's say, disaster happens, because these are mostly in the fringes of the forest, where you have these settlements, these agriculture settlements. So all these have to be, let's say, repelled, but they are not really deep into the jungle itself. So in terms of tourism, it's not really affected by this situation. However, as a country, as a nation, people are really trying to fight this off, trying really to avoid this to happen. And there is a strong movement to protect the forest and even to oust the current environment minister, who is really doing a very poor work. So there is a lot of movement, political movement.
It's an understatement.
Yeah, of course. So there is a very strong movement to oust him and change the policies some way or another. So although there is all these things going on in the media and everything, you can rest assured there is a strong wave to change this and to fight against it. So this is what I can tell you as someone living here and seeing the news all the time and have the information directly from different ONGs and NGOs, sorry, in English, and lots of groups and associations that are fighting against this, let's say, this lack of real environment policy. That's what's going on in Brazil right now.
Thank you.
So I have two questions. We are hearing, well, in addition to in the United States, but we are hearing tragic information from South America regarding the COVID epidemic. Please share your perspectives. The second question is, why did Connor call one particular church the most important one in the country?
Okay.
Well, I called it the most important church in the country because it's certainly the most gilded. It's got that 900 kilograms of 18-karat gold in the gilding of the church. And it's seen as the best example of Portuguese Baroque in Brazil. It's rivaled only by a church called Pilar, which is in Ouro Preto, that Sydney spoke so highly of, and as he should. It's just a wonderful church. But this is why it's considered the high Baroque church, high Baroque art, Portuguese Baroque art, and it was finally finished in, oh God, it's 1948, I think it was finally finished. COVID, if I can just speak briefly about Salvador, and again, I'll go back to mentioning our mayor, who has been exemplary from the time he's come in, young guy, gung-ho, with great vision. And Salvador is seen as one of the icons in Brazil in its fight against COVID. They did all the right things. They continue to do all the right things. The city has had relatively low levels of the contagion. But again, it's back to Bolsonaro, who is a complete denier. It's only going to be a little bit of a cold and all of that we've heard from so many times. And he had a very good Minister for Health in, who was pretty much forced out, and then he's had a number of guys in afterwards who really don't know what they're doing. So we're all hopeful for the vaccines, but with Bolsonaro in charge, we're in a sticky wicket here. The only good thing that Bolsonaro has done, to my mind, for tourism is that he got rid of the need for the visa from the United States. That's the only positive thing he has done throughout his and he's a disgrace. That's my personal opinion. I don't know if this is the forum to be saying that, but he's a disgrace, and he's an embarrassment to the country, and all the people around him, to my mind, should not be where they are, especially the minister for the environment.
Yeah, that's right. Well, actually, both Mr. Bolsonaro and his foreign affairs minister are two walking disasters, as many Brazilians see them. This is for sure. Don't get fooled when you have news that he has a lot of political support. Actually, his support would be around 30 to 30-something% of the voters, which means that most of the population is against his policies and his ways of doing politics, or his government at all. But coming back to the COVID situation, yes, there is a return in terms of cases in Brazil. But the thing is, although, as Connor mentioned, Mr. Bolsonaro is in denial, or is in denial about it, the state governors and the city mayors, these are the guys who are really doing the work. So each state, because Brazil is really a big country, and each region has a different situation nowadays. So the governors are taking measures according to the local situations. Each city is taking measures according to their particular situation, so that things are, again, coming into control. In a way, of course, you cannot control the pandemic, but you can control the speed of contamination, and you can control the number of cases if you take the right measures. And these are being taken throughout the country, in spite of the lack of a central policy towards the pandemic situation, but things are being taken care of by the local governments. And Connor mentioned the vaccines. Yes, this is a very strong talking here in Brazil nowadays. And Brazil is part of the global effort for the vaccines. And 4 of them are being tested here in Brazil. And the 4 of them are already passing through the 3rd stage, meaning that probably by the end of the month or beginning of January, 3 or probably all of them should be certified to start being used. So little by little things are being taken care of, but it's not something that is out of control. Gotcha. Each state and each of the cities are taking measures. So some cities reversed their policy of opening up. Some cities have, let's say, put in practice new business hours exactly in order to control a little bit the situation. Parties have been canceled in many cities. I just got the news that New Year's celebration in Salvador, for instance, were canceled in order to avoid a big gathering of people in the streets. So although these measures seem a little bit harsh, they actually are in a way to avoid a worse situation in the future, especially because everyone is expecting the vaccine. So we would rather have a better situation when the vaccine comes, so things wouldn't be so drastic. Okay.
Sounds a lot like a...
Yeah, a little bit about similar to the US in a way. Yes, it's very similar. And just taking the lead from Connor regarding the Baroque churches and everything, Brazil is very rich in terms of the Baroque art, the Portuguese Baroque art, and the churches in Brazil are extremely rich, especially the historical towns in Minas, the historical churches in Salvador, in Recife. Also here in Rio, you have fantastic samples of the Baroque churches. Mm-hmm. So for those who are very much into architecture and history, Brazil is a treasure trove because you can find amazing churches throughout the country. In all the small towns and the villages throughout the countryside, you can find authentic Baroque style churches that are really surprising. So this is something that Brazil is very proud of, let's say.
All right, so why don't we just do one more question and then we will close. So if we get one more question, and if not,
go ahead.
Let's go ahead and meet up next week. Monday, next week, we will be focusing, as I mentioned, the Jewish community. And so we're looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much, Sydney. Thank you so much, Connor, for your in-depth, amazing presentations. And as I mentioned,
thank you very much, all of you, for the opportunity and for the patience with us.
Thank you, Roseanne. Thank you, Rosanna. And I'll follow up with those videos.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Actually, Leah, can I ask one quick question? Is there a Jewish population in Brazil?
If there is a Jewish population, in São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, most, all over, but most in São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro.
Okay.
Doesn't it have one of the largest Jewish populations in South America, or?
Yeah, mostly, well, São Paulo is, let's say, the center for the Jewish community in Brazil. So the largest one is in São Paulo, and it rivals with the one in Buenos Aires, for instance, in number of members. And then we have Rio with a strong Jewish community too, mostly centered around the Copacabana district.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and we have the Jewish tradition in many other cities in Brazil, but in a very smaller scale than Rio and São Paulo.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much. It was so interesting.
Yes, thank you so much.
I can't wait to be able to travel again.
Hopefully so. Everyone is really eager to start traveling again, and we cannot wait for that.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right, so we'll be seeing you
Next
again
Monday.
next week, and there'll be new
Yeah.
speakers as well. So, all right, everybody, have a lovely night, and
Thank
we'll see you
you.
soon.
It was
Thank
beautiful.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Just to answer your question, there are 120,000 Jews in Brazil, according to Google.
Oh, wow.
120,000.
Amazing.
Cool.
Okay. Great.
Google.
Google. All right.
All right, then. Thank you so much, Leah, Rosanna.
Thank you.
Bye bye, everybody.
All the best.
I'll send you those
Bye-bye.
links. I think Sydney has the links. He'll send them to you.
Awesome.
Thanks again.
Okay.
All right. Thank
Perfect.
you.
Bye bye. Bye bye. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All the best.
Thank you.